I know, again, this is very boring. Really not, actually I'm not going to put that in there. Really not much I can do about that. This is just, it is what it is. Okay. We're actually going to partially assemble the box. Here's standard Boss style input jack, or power jack. Okay. I'm going to show you, you can break a couple of rules here, a couple of fake rules that people come up with to make the wiring a little bit easier. That configuration on the inside of the box for me, when this is like that, okay, so normally it would be like that, or it would be like that. And what that does is that gets, that plug is offset, so you'd either offset it like that or like that, right? However, for wiring in this box, it gets the wires in a better position if that's like that. That's straight up and down sort of, so, but that ends up being sideways. Okay, well, that's just too bad. It's not a big deal. I'm sure that some people are probably wondering about that, who get these things, oh, you put it in sideways. Well, yeah, I did, but not by accident. It's there for a reason. It's a 16 millimeter wrench that happens to fit this particular. Actually, the 16 millimeter wrench is going to fit an awful lot of things in here. You'll see. And all you really have to do is just push down hard, and usually it's enough friction to keep it from turning. And you don't want to make this too tight because it'll just break that. That's just plastic. Okay, it'll break. You don't want to make it too tight. Okay. Again, I get most of these components from Small Bear. Great prices. The service is excellent. I would highly encourage anybody doing anything like this to patronize Small Bear and Pedal Parts Plus. Pedal Parts Plus, I think, is in Louisiana. They're all really great, really easy to work with. Great folks. I can't say enough good things. Okay. Now we're going to install our nice Switchcraft jacks. Oh, by the way, this particular box, it's a Hammond 1590 BB. It's a 1590 BB. Okay. We're not doing anything exotic here, just standard Switchcraft jacks. Same like anybody else. The input jack is a stereo jack. When you plug in the input, it will actually turn on power to the box. Now, I bet you guys are probably wondering why we do that, why we just don't have power coming from the stomp switch, why when you plug it in, it actually starts to drain power. And that has to do with the power supply. There are large caps, no, not large caps, but like 47 microfarad and 100 microfarad bypass caps in the power supply here, in the power supply section here. That's a standard. It's sort of like standard value that you use for bypassing. Okay. What happens is these caps actually take a couple of seconds to charge up and to discharge. And if this was not turned on all the time, you would have a really awful noise and delays and distortion and things every time you turn this on or turned it off. So that it really does need to be powered the entire time. And the most convenient way to do it is when you plug in the input jack, it turns power on. That's why everybody does it like that. That's just how it's done. Okay? So I bet y'all have wondered about that. Now you know. So in goes jacks. This, the proper size happens to be a ½ inch for the Switchcraft, and I'll show you a little trick here. It's no accident that a lot of the stuff you see has flat sides, and it not only has flat sides, it has, you know, they're actually a specific size. I'll show you. Oops. All right. What you can do. It's always hard to hold on to these things. You know, they always want to wiggle inside. It's really frustrating, right? I mean, we all have that problem. Turns out that 16 millimeter is exactly the right size to fit around the flats. So I can hold that in place, come around, and we don't want to overly tighten these, but they should be tight. Okay. Oops, there we go. So the same thing on this side. Now I can hold on to the inside and get these lined up really nicely without too much trouble or having to grab pliers. And you know, just any time you see flats like this, think that you can probably grab it with pliers and make it work. Okay. Good likelihood that you'll not pliers, a wrench, and make it work. There's a good likelihood that there's going to be some wrench somewhere that's going to fit that really well. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to grab my switch. I'm going to install this switch, what most people would consider to be sideways. I don't know, you know, most people do that. For this particular box, the wiring just works out better if I do that. So I guess the point I'm making here is don't be afraid to do stuff like this. Get that sideways, or put this in sideways from what it looks like in any diagram you see. You know, it doesn't matter. Get it. Match it to your box. You know, none of this really matters. And of course, the flat washer goes first, and the lock washer goes between the nut and the flat washer. Okay. This happens to be a 9/16. These pots, these are alpha pots, I believe. Really nice. And same trick. Turned out that a 13/16 wrench will fit around the flat part there. So I can kind of trying to do this so that you can see what I'm doing. Normally I wouldn't have this much trouble. And again, you don't want to over tighten these because you can break the pots, the jacks. And you actually can. You can, you know, it's just a lot of plastic in this stuff. You know, you can break them. Okay, so don't break them. Okay, very good. So now we're going to start the wiring. Where there's actually another switch that goes here. I'm going to leave it out until the very end because it just gets in my way. Okay, so we're going to do that last. Okay, now we get to the actual wiring here. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wire in the power first, and the reason that I'm going to do that is that this needs to be strain relieved. Okay, we're going to have the 9-volt jack coming off there. We're also going to have power going to the board coming off of there, so that's going to move around a bit. You don't want these flopping around in here. You really don't, because over time, you know what's going to happen. This is going to flex, and it's going to flex, and it's going to flex, and a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, that's going to break, and I'm going to have a warranty repair, or somebody's solo is going to not go well, and we don't want that to break. So it only takes a minute to do a strain relief there. We're going to do it with hot glue. There are many different ways to do it. You're going to find that hot glue doesn't stick to aluminum very well. It certainly doesn't stick to powder coat very well. Powder coat is essentially plastic. You know, I mean, yeah, it's very, very tough. You know, you powder coat parts for like motorcycles and airplanes and, you know, pedals and stuff. Very, very tough, but essentially it's like a very slick sort of plasticky kind of thing. Nothing really sticks to it that well. I've tried all sorts of things. So we're going to have to be a little bit creative in how we do the strain relief, unless you just want to stick it in there and put a bunch of hot glue in there and just, you know, it does stick somewhat to the aluminum and the powder coat, and it'll probably last. I have, you know, before I started doing it like this, I used to just do that, but the technique I'm going to show you now is far better and a lot more reliable. Okay? These particular 9-volt jacks. Let's see if we can get it to focus on that. Put my hand in back. They're very nice. It's not that stupid flexible style. They're awful. Ugh. Terrible. No, you want these. And you know what? These are so cheap. I mean, we're talking about pennies of difference. You may not find these at Radio Shack. I'm not sure. You may only get the garbage ones there these days. But again, you can get these from Small Barrelette, or you can probably get them from Pedal Parts Plus or anyone else that sells pedal parts. Okay? So what I'm going to do, we're not going to be cheap with the wire here. Wire's cheap. We're going to leave ourselves lots of room to work. Okay, I need a wire to go from here to down there somewhere. So I'm going to cut myself a nice long piece of wire. Okay? Because you don't want to, wire's so cheap that you really don't want to take any chances with running out. I'm trying to get the lighting in here a little bit better for the camera. It isn't really great for me, but yeah, it's a little bit better for the camera there. Okay. What I'm going to do, what needs to happen, at least in this particular part, is these two wires need to go together up there. Okay. And there's a bunch of little tricks you're going to see here, so I'll get my thermal strippers, right? I'm going to strip off more than I need, give the wire a little twist, and there you go, perfectly stripped. You sort of route it. Remember, this is the pre-bond, so it'll kind of stay where you put it. I'm going to stick it through. I'm going to make a little bend, okay? That little bend, and then I want this to be tucked out of the way, so I'm going to go behind there. And what I'm looking for here, again, I don't want, let's see. I'm not much of a videographer here, I'm a cinematographer. You don't want the insulation to intrude into that soldering area. You know, you'll see that so many times where that insulation is just right up against the solder. Okay, you know, I'm not going to slam other people's techniques, but in my opinion, that's not the right way to do it. You want that insulation away from the solder. That's probably about right. You can be a little bit closer, but you don't want that near the solder joint. Okay, it's just going to melt into the joint. It's going to make a mess. That's just not what you want. Again, just in my opinion. Okay. I do want this tucked out of the way, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some tape. This is some old tape that's gotten so old that I can't use it on my for guitar building anymore because it just falls apart. Oh, that's the other thing. You know, don't buy cheap masking tape. Cheap masking tape will just keep on breaking and it'll frustrate the hell out of you. Well, this stuff is hard enough to do without crappy equipment and supplies. Okay, so now that's routed really, really nicely. Now it's just going underneath. Let me show you. See that? See how it's just kind of routed and back there. It just gets it out of the way, and you'll see why when you see how the board fits. Okay. We got a piece of tape there. I'm actually going to strip a little more wire off of this. It's not really long enough for my tastes. So we'll strip a little bit more there. What I'm actually going to do is increase the temperature on this just a little bit. There's a sweet spot on the thermal strippers where they will melt the insulation, but it won't make a complete mess on the strippers. If you have the temperature too high, it's just going to completely melt the insulation into goop, which you really don't want. And I'm going to tin these wires. Actually, I think it comes pre-tinned, but now that I've stripped more away, it's obviously not pre-tinned anymore. I'm going to make sure, because this really doesn't come twisted either, except on the part that's tinned. Okay. What I'm going to do, here's how I tin my wires. Again, we're going to try to not get, oh, I need more water here. I forgot to put in water. I use distilled water. Okay, you may or may not have to use distilled water. You know, you just nothing weird. Just distilled water from the supermarket. Okay, the reason that I use distilled water is that I'm on a well. I'm kind of off in the boonies of Connecticut here. So I'm on a well. The water's very hard. It's got a lot of crud in it. It's got iron in it. It has all sorts of stuff in it that you don't want to get onto your soldering iron because it'll cause you issues. Okay, it'll cause issues with the life of the tip. Even with the softener that I have and the filters that I have, it still causes some issues. So I use distilled water. All right, a little more water on there. You don't need too much. Just enough to do the job. Okay. Oh, my technique for tinning wires is as follows. Okay, what I'm going to do, that's better. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come from the back of the wire, I'm going to add a little bit of solder to make my solder bridge again, and then I'm going to quickly go down, not all the way to the insulation, and then come back up. Okay? So watch, I'll do it on this one here first, okay? I'm gonna do that. Let me see, am I in your way? No. Okay, good. Okay, that's it. Very simple. Again, we're trying really hard to not flow underneath the insulation, and this time we didn't. We did good. A little bit gets up in there. You know, it's not really a fatal mistake. You know, you don't have to throw out the pedal and start over. It'll probably be fine. But try to do it the right way. Just try. You know, if you can, it's great. And as you get better at it, you'll more reliably be able to do it the right way. Okay. I'm actually going to move this over just a little bit. We'll see why. When we actually apply the hot glue, I think that was going to be in my way just a little bit. And we just moved it over a touch. Now we're going to stick this in. Same exact thing. Okay. A little bit of a hard time seeing here. The light's kind of in my eyes, but what the heck, we're making a movie. And you can see what happens to this masking tape when it gets old and unusable. It just starts breaking. What I often do is just before I start, just break off a bunch of them and just stick them on my bench. So let's do that. Okay. I'm going to grab a piece, and that's going to be routed same exact way. Same exact way. Okay. You can see I'm just kind of doing it by hand, shoving it in there. And there we go. And that's nice. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and solder. Soldering is going to happen exactly the same way. Like I said in the first video, all the soldering we do, it all happens the same way. Now, if you wanted to, you could go and you could trim these right now. You could. You know, you can come in here and trim them. But like I said, it's not that big of a deal with wires. Because you don't really get that shock. B, these cutters, you know, it's a shear, these are shear cutters. They're not pinch cutters, they're shear cutters, and by virtue of the fact of being a shear cutter, the edges are very sharp. They're not going to last quite as long as a pinch cutter, but it does minimize the shock going into it anyhow. Now, they make real sharp cutters. That would probably never give you an issue, and they're expensive. I wouldn't really consider these, you know, anti-shock, you know, like the real ones. But for this, it's perfectly okay. Okay, so you can cut these wires after you solder. Okay, same exact thing. Let me see if I can get it out of the way. Make the solder bridge, heat it up, flow in some solder. Sometimes I flow a little bit from the back. And that's it. Inspect the joint, make sure it looks good. It does look good. And we move on to the next joint. Now this little red guy, he goes exactly the same way. He's going to go in sort of sideways like that. Okay. And then it'll sort of come down and back. Okay. Another little piece of tape. I really like using masking tape for this stuff. It just makes it so much easier, you know. Same thing. We're going to come in, solder bridge. Okay. This time, what I did is I came in from the right side here, made my solder bridge, and I soldered from the back because I could. If I could have done that here, I would have. But it's difficult to get underneath. But here, in general, the way I make most of my wiring joints is I'll heat up from one side and I'll feed from the other side. You know, solder does an interesting thing. It sort of flows towards the heat. And the flux, for whatever reason, flows away from the heat, or boils away from the heat, or does whatever it does. I'm not really sure why. Probably has something to do with the surface tension, but anyhow, that's what happens. So you always kind of want to solder from the back or from the opposite side as the soldering iron is, because the solder will tend to flow towards the iron for whatever reason. Now we need one more wire. It's going to come out about like that. Again, we're going to leave it long. Okay. Another advantage to leaving it long is, you know, you give yourself a couple of mistakes. You know, you allow yourself enough wire to make a couple of mistakes. Okay, same thing. Give it a little twist, and voila, perfect strip. Thermal strippers are great, boy. If you could afford some thermal strippers, great stuff. Love them, love them, love them, love them, love them. Wouldn't use anything else. But they cost some money, I'm afraid. It actually costs more than, you could spend more on thermal strippers than you can on your solder station, especially if you get something like a Hacko FX 888. You know, you'll spend more on the thermal strippers than you spend on that. Okay. Okay, same thing. I'm gonna heat from this side, and I'll flow from the back. I could even probably zoom in a little bit more. Maybe you can really see what I'm doing here. Come on, you're gonna focus for me. Come on, you can do it. I'm not sure why I can't get a focus on there. Alright, well, anyway. I'm gonna heat from one side, make my solder bridge, flow from the back side, and it will have flowed through the front. Okay, and I'll come back and I'll simply trim that off. One thing that I do want you to see, which I think is important, I'm actually going to just scrunch this over just a touch before we actually strain relieve it. What I like to see with my wiring, trim him. Okay. I don't mind if come on, Mr. Camera, focus for me, baby. Huh. Maybe I need like a macro mode or something. Somebody wants to donate a decent camera to me. I appreciate it. Okay. I don't mind if insulation is touching insulation. What I don't want to see is insulation, right, from one wire touching metal from another wire. So you can see I've taken pains so that the insulation from the various different wires, right, are not rubbing against metal. Not rubbing, and certainly not rubbing against metal from another wire. Why? Because over time, with vibration or a little bit of handling, or we're not going to have that problem here because of the strain relief, but just generally that's really bad. Okay, vibration that can wear through over time and cause shorts. Okay, we don't want that. So I've taken pains to make sure that we don't have that situation here. Okay. Now, you know, when you do your own wiring, you're going to have to decide how important that is to you. You may not think that's very important, and that's fine. But I think it's fairly important. Now we're going to do our strain relief, and what I use for strain relief is hot glue. And again, the hot glue does not stick very well to the aluminum or to the powder coat, but it does stick pretty well to the plastic and PC board that's actually on here. So what I'm going to do, make a nice strain relief, is I'm basically going to come around. I'm going to put a bunch of hot glue down here to bind all of these wires to each other, bind them somewhat to the case. Okay, and then I'm going to extend that over. Really, the important part is to strain relieve the power supply, not the power supply, but the conductors going into the jack here. Okay, we don't want these to wiggle around. If these wiggle around, it'll break there, and especially because I'm going to have this on there. You know, over time, people moving this around, that could break there. Okay. And for some people it will. But we don't want that. So what I'm going to do, and here's another advantage to having the tape, because hot glue guns, you know, they tend to drip all over the place. When I start getting drips, what I'm going to do when to get rid of the drip, I'm just going to take the tip and I'm going to sort of rub it on the masking tape there, so that I don't make a big mess. All right, so I'm going to come in again. I'm just going to flow a bunch of hot glue underneath, try to make it neat. Then I'll bring it over the top and I'll flow it in between all of the wires here. I'm going to try to make no voids, okay? This is just going to take a minute, and then we're going to have to wait for it to cool. Now obviously, when I'm doing this for real, I can't, you know, I'm not going to make one board at a time here, or one box at a time, because the hot glue takes time to dry, to cool. And if I did one at a time, this would just take forever. I do 4, 5, 10, you know, however many at a time. Okay, so I'm extending that up now. See, I'm actually going behind the wires. I'm filling all these voids, and I'm going to come in between here.